Okay, we're here because the issue of does California have an economic future? That's a lot of press, particularly in the business press and the conservative press, basically has us as a permanent basket case and never be able to get out of it. We answer that question a bit. We're very, very tough, I think, on where we're going, but there are great opportunities. This is a report nurturing California's industries, and maybe we'll start with this main point that the two of the three authors are here. Marshall, does California have a future? Or are the reports of California's death being somewhat exaggerated?
Somewhat premature? Somewhat premature. Definitely somewhat premature, Joel. California, first of all, California has a tremendous present as well as a future. It's the world's, arguably, depending upon how you measure it, the fourth or the fifth largest economy, has tremendous strengths in a lot of areas. But as the work that you and I and Sougata have been doing over the last year or so have illustrated, there's some really big red flags about where we're going. And especially around the relationship between the state government and the business climate. That's where the problems are, and that's what really needs kind of wholesale remaking in our minds.
And why do you think that this gap between the business interest and the political interest has gotten so wide?
I think it's mostly errors of omission, really. I think that the state kind of takes business for granted. We've had this tremendous economic miracle called the information age, right, called the tech industry, that has provided tremendous wealth to California. And I think the state has just taken it so much for granted that it thinks it's going to be there, and it just magically appears and doesn't understand the really key underpinnings of what it takes to have an economy that vibrant. And so the relationship between the state and private industry has become very contentious. The state thinks that business is a pocket to be picked, doesn't need to be nurtured, doesn't care about attracting new industry in, especially if the industry that is required to come in has some form of environmental impact, like even light manufacturing or natural resource usage. And so the state is making it very difficult for businesses to continue doing business here, and we're seeing the result of that is an exodus of businesses from California in very visible ways.
So Sougata, I know you've worked on issues with other countries and other places. Is there some way we can learn a lesson? I mean, it seems to me California is coming in with unbelievable assets relative to anybody else, and yet other places seem to be advancing much more quickly. Who can we learn from, and what lessons can we take and apply here?
Thanks, Joel. That's a great question. I tend to agree with Marshall in the first part. California had a great past. It's one of the leading states in the U.S., growing with digital technology innovations. So that part is great. So, but we cannot take it as something as granted that this is going to happen in future as well. Nature of business is changing. Okay. Now, whatever success we had, that's great. But I think we have to really look into in a different way. For example, as you said, that what examples we can look at. Let's talk about Singapore. I lived and worked in Singapore for a number of years, and the way the Singapore government plans the economy to grow, they have a long-term view, like next 5 years, next 10 years, next 15 years. The way they plan it, their master plan or the blueprint is really amazing, I would say. So they have a vision of the next 10 or 15 years, what they want to do, and they work through that plan pretty closely. So one of the things they do is, Singapore, the first thing they invested a lot in the education so that their general population is highly educated, they got the skills. So they moved up to high-skilled jobs. Now, of course, in an economy, there are jobs that is needed for the medium skill, for the low skill, or semi-skilled workers. So what Singapore did is they know that their population can manage or handle with their capability or education high-level work, but to run the economy, particularly the middle income group, depends on that hugely. So, for example, if I talk about domestic service, okay, or service in the healthcare industry, what they did is they come up with a plan to take people from neighboring countries, okay, train them in the neighboring countries, bring them into Singapore, train them further, and make them ready to take up those jobs in the service sector. Could be healthcare, domestic health, elder care. They make it very vibrant. So the economy is running in that sector very, very well, and the economy is getting its desired results.
It's relevant to California because, like Singapore, we're an immigrant society. Are there closer to home examples? I mean, Singapore is an exceptional place. All three of us have had involvements with it. How about closer to home?
Well, I think there are a couple of domestic examples that are great, as well as some offshore examples. But before I get into the specifics on it, I just want to build on one thing that Sougata made, and that is we're talking about places that have intentionality about them, right? This is not just a random walk for Singapore or for Utah, which is another great example, or for Costa Rica, which is another great example. These are countries that have taken a great deal of care of thinking about what is my position in the world, where's the world going, and how do I make life better for the vast majority of ordinary people. That does not seem to be happening here in California. And so, for instance, in Costa Rica, one of the big strategies was, let's make sure that we can attract companies that can provide jobs that pay better than average. What do we need to do that? We need to have an English-speaking workforce. Let's teach our people English, increase the literacy level so that we can be attractive to businesses of all types that require English speakers. Utah, the government relationship with businesses is very intentional. If you're a company that is looking to grow its talent base, Utah is able to put together training programs from high school all the way through to university, follow up with those training programs to actually make sure people get into the training programs, be able to provide the same level of tax incentives that any other place would put together, but be welcoming about it and look and say, okay, we want people in specific sectors like R&D that is biotech oriented or engineering oriented. They're very deliberative about saying these are the areas that we want to nurture. We're not taking a deliberative approach. And so one of the big recommendations that we have, which comes in this document, Nurturing California's Industries, is that we should be taking a bet on your winners approach, right? We identified 5 or 6 different sectors that we think are important. Agriculture, but specifically ag tech, and we'll talk about that in a second, because ag tech is one of the real jewels that California has because it has such a dominance in the overall agricultural area. Aerospace, the new space industry, not just the old aerospace industry of Boeing and people, the Hughes aircraft era, but the new space industries, the creative industries, of course, which is a huge strength for California, semiconductors, computer manufacturing, and then as we get into this new world of AI, where we're going to be seeing ordinary people making a living more frequently by tending to other people. Right. There are really kind of 2 aspects to that. One is being able to nurture the actual delivery of services to seniors, family people, individuals in the healthcare area, as well as managing the payer system. Interestingly, California has a strength in HMOs and in the management of healthcare. And as we move into what looks like more of a single-payer system for healthcare around the United States, people are going to be looking for exemplars, and California is an exemplar. So those are 6 areas that we have real strengths now that we should really be intentionally backing in order to be able to see growth.
Well, why aren't we? I mean, why is a place like Singapore or Utah able to look at the economic trends and say, hey, we have a strength here, like in the case of Utah, a fairly well-educated population, fairly disciplined workforce, a good physical environment. What is it? Why are we not able to pull this together? You're looking at it maybe from outside California. Why is this happening?
I think, this is exactly where we want to look at through this study. Probably we got too carried away with the tech sector or pharmaceuticals. They're great, they're doing fantastic, but that doesn't mean other sectors are getting impacted in a negative way. So probably a time has come, so we are looking more closely, particularly those sectors. I think we had a very interesting statistics. 99% of business in California is small and medium enterprise. So it's basically everything, pretty much the whole economy. So probably our study, that's exactly what we're trying to point out here. The time has come to look into the small and medium, business, and what is that they're looking for? What is the help that is needed from the government? And the government has to be very proactive. So they are basically the meat of the business is there in California. People are leaving, because they don't get enough revenue or income. That's exactly where the focus should be. And this is
so. Is government not talking to business enough? I mean, because every time we have a meeting with business leaders, let's say with the New California Coalition, sometimes we're told about problems we didn't even know existed, or that nobody ever talked to me, so I walked out. What do you see?
The core problem is that government does not think that business needs to be engaged as a partner. There is a contentious attitude. Every business person, and we have talked through our research to literally hundreds of business people from all levels, from small businesses all the way up to large corporations. They view California government as a contentious challenger to them as opposed to a partner. And in all of these other places, like Singapore and Utah, and in a lot of other states as well, and Costa Rica, the hallmark is public-private partnerships, the ability to work together. And that's not just like a legal entity of, let's create a public-private partnership. It's really an attitudinal question. It's an issue of the state bureaucracy not thinking that business is out to do evil, but in fact is a force that can be worked with together. Most of the objections of business people, we did a survey with CEOs last year that validates this. Most of the business people are willing to put up with the taxation issues. What they hate is the arbitrary enforcement of picayune regulation. In the real estate area, just try to get a real estate project approved. It's going to take you more years than you have left on your life.
Right.
And this is why businesses are saying, if I'm going to put my money into a project and try to grow something, why on earth would I do it here?
So how do we change those attitudes? I was thinking, Sougata, about India, where I've spent some time. India was known, as being incredibly difficult to do business in. Now it's changed. India's on its way to becoming a superpower. How did that process work? How did people in India begin to realize that fighting business wasn't a good thing? And how did that change? How did the government change?
Right. I think this is exactly what India was trying to do over the last 20, 30 years. It was, before that, it was all red tape and a lot of regulations.
Licensing.
Exactly, license Raj, exactly, that. So anything you want to get started with your business, you have to probably have 10 licenses or 15 licenses. that's impossible for somebody to cross all those hurdles. So the government in the later part realized that we have to remove those red tapes. We have to make things more simplified. So things can move faster and has to be more focused. Okay, it can't be one rule that applies to all kinds of business because every business works differently. And one of the things why we do see some success in the IT industry. This is the one which is least regulated when it started. So it was like they had the opportunity to grow without this license and regulations. So, and that is one of the success story. So this is one of the models, how that IT sector, which is really a commendable force now in the global economy, that actually happened after this license Raj, right. And it flourished so quickly. So this is something a lesson we can really learn and move on. Yeah.
Well, and we see that here happening on the local level. There are a lot of cities that have created regulation concierges, where if you're a small business person and you're looking to open a microbrewery in Anaheim, California, as an example, there's a desk that you can go to where they will sit down, work with you and say, what is it you're trying to accomplish? Oh, you need these 5 permissions or 5 permits or whatever. Let us walk you through the process, take you to the individual departments, kind of do that legwork for you so that you don't have to spend all of your time bollocksed up in this red tape. Why can't we do that on the state level? Utah does that. Arizona does that. Colorado does that. And by the way, look at the results. From a relative perspective, they're gaining faster than we are. Now, that's not to say that life is falling apart here in California. We don't want to give that impression. California is still growing. California is still strong, but it is no longer growing at the same rate that its competitors are. Our work, our research work, has shown that over the past couple of years. We are losing share, in a way, to other states. And that's something that will eventually come to, that we'll have to pay the price for.
So to sort of summarize the end, what would you say to Governor Newsom and the legislature as the first steps towards taking advantage of our inherent strengths and not continuing to fall behind other states and other countries?
Yeah, I would say, like 2 or 3 very important things we have to look at. First of all, we have to really address one of the issues that is driving the middle-income California out of the state, which is like too much of housing, prices, the rent as well as the house cost. So that is something we need to look at very carefully, because if you do not live comfortably, possibly you cannot work comfortably. So definitely the housing crisis, we know that's a big problem, but that needs to be addressed pretty,
Will be the subject of our next report.
Exactly. And then, as Marshall was saying, that it's more of a proactive public-private partnership. So the government really has to maybe hold hand, for a while for the small and medium enterprises. Give them a room to breathe. Let them grow, and then, if you want to have some regulations, bring after when they have in a position they can sustain their own business. So of course, so that growth phase is very important. We have to let them grow first, get a platform, and then restructure the industry. So that would be 1 or 2 things I should recommend.
Just reminds me when I was actually in the New York airport, I ran into a friend who has a biotech company. She's really on the cutting edge of sort of animal biology, science. She was in California. She just moved to Georgia. And they said Athens, Georgia, opened up the door to them, helped them with taxes, encouraged them to be there. So here's somebody who really wants to stay in California, and she's going to Georgia because of exactly the things you're talking about.
So if I were talking directly to Governor Newsom, what I would say is, look, the answer to this is unbelievably simple. Listen. Take in the input. You have a vehicle called GoBiz, which is highly underfunded compared to other states' business development organizations, but at least the mechanism exists. Put some money into that, and put some money into retraining the bureaucracy to become more customer-focused. Every business on the planet has had to become more customer-focused. There are tons of programs out there to teach bureaucrats how to listen. We're not using them. We're continuing to allow people to be contentious in state government. Our litigation level is too high. We need to figure out ways of limiting the amount of litigation so that we can at least say, let's get on with it. We may not have a perfect solution, but let's have an interactive relationship and not have everybody sue each other and stop projects continually. This is part of what a state that cares about doing business and cares about growing its business base does.
So, basically what we hope to do with this report, and I think it's an important part of our mission as a center, is not just to help business just as business, but to understand that, and I think Singapore is a great example, because if you read Lee Kuan Yew, it's very clear, business has to serve the interests of the population, creating high-wage jobs, providing decent training. So a lot of things that we think California can do have been done by other places, and we should be able to do them, and we have more assets than anyone else. And so this report, as I see it, is not a report of just a critique, but also a report that offers hope for the future, and tries to get business engaged in the business of how do we make a better state and make it better for the people who live here.
One additional thought for you. As Sougata mentioned, 99% of the businesses in the state are small businesses. Right now, if you were a small business person, would you add an extra person on your payroll with all of the regulatory nonsense that it's involved of having to do? Of course you wouldn't, right? Especially in our virtualized world where we can buy resources from all over the planet to get it done. But just think, if we could make the state that much easier to do business in, where 10% of the small businesses added one person, think of the number of jobs that would bring. We're not looking at it that way. We're not looking at how do we make it easy for businesses to add people. We're looking at being punitive and saying, here are the 47,000 things that you have to do if you add a person. That's just not the right attitude. And so if we can correct that attitude, I think we can see some significant results.
I think that this is a report that I think business should be reading and the government should be reading. It'll be interesting whether we ever get a response from Sacramento on any of this.
If I just add one thing here, California has great history, great resources. It'll be a loss for us, it's a missed opportunity. If we do not move to the next stage of growth, and there's a new skills, new strategies are needed for the next stage of growth. We have to understand that we have to do something differently now to sustain this level of growth. That's exactly how should be the focus.
Well, and talk about what the next research is going to be as we move into AI-driven world and ChatGPT, which completely upends the way people actually work and what people are required to do in order to be able to get stuff done. We're going to need to rethink all of this yet one more time.
Right.
And so that has some very profound implications for where we're going. But stay tuned.
Yeah, and I just hope that people who watch this go to our website at Chapman University and begin to become engaged with what we're trying to do. Because again, the goal is not to help rich people get richer, it's to help the middle class thrive and that the working class people can move to the middle class. That is the entire intent of what we're doing.